I'm in my early 40s, divorced from my first marriage and remarried about 5 years ago. I have two kids from my previous marriage, 13 and 11, and my current husband has two kids from his previous relationship, 12 and 9. We've been trying to blend our families, and for the most part, things have been okay. About 6 months ago, my ex in laws, who are pretty well off, approached me about setting up a trust fund, especially for my two kids. They've always been incredibly supportive, especially after my first marriage ended. These are good people who genuinely care about their grandkids. The trust is substantial. We're talking about a significant amount that could fully cover college education, potentially help with a first home down payment, and provide a solid financial cushion for their future. My initial reaction was gratitude. It was a massive relief to know my kids would have a financial safety net. I remember sitting down with my husband to share the news, expecting him to feel as happy for the kids as I did. But his reaction was less than enthusiastic. He listened, nodded along, and then sat back crossing his arms. When he finally spoke, he said he was happy for them, but asked, "Shouldn't we split it somehow?" I was a bit taken aback. This was a gift specifically from my ex in laws for their biological grandchildren. His kids are wonderful and I love them dearly, but this was different. I gently explained that my ex in laws had no obligation to leave anything to his children, that this trust fund was their way of looking out for their grandkids, especially with the way education costs are rising. But my husband couldn't seem to let it go. Over the next few weeks, he started making subtle comments about fairness. He'd say things like, "Must be nice to know college is covered," or "Would be great if everyone got the same treatment." I tried to brush it off, assuming he'd work through whatever jealousy or resentment was building up. But it didn't get better, it got worse. It wasn't long before I noticed him making remarks to his own kids, suggesting that my kids were somehow privileged and implying that his kids were missing out. My husband even started mentioning his discontent in front of my kids. It started subtly, a passing remark about lucky them or having it easy. I could see my kids getting uncomfortable, starting to feel guilty about something that was meant to be a positive thing for them. I tried talking to my husband privately, urging him to drop the subject, but he refused, insisting it wasn't fair. He argued that since we're family, the inheritance should be split. When I reminded him this was a gift specifically from my ex in laws, he only grew more frustrated. He told me that by not sharing the inheritance with his kids, I was being partial and that I should push for fairness. It was exhausting. I spent weeks feeling torn, trying to keep the peace at home while still respecting the boundaries my ex in laws had set. They had been kind enough to think of their grandkids in this way. I didn't think it was right to ask them to change that. My husband seemed to think I should be more insistent with them, as if this was my call to make. One evening, I overheard my husband talking to his kids. He was explaining that some people cared more about their own children and that sometimes in life people didn't think about everyone equally. Hearing him, it dawned on me that he was framing me as someone who was treating his kids unfairly, that I was somehow withholding from them. It hurt. But more than that, it made me furious. I felt stuck. I was angry that he'd even think of turning his kids against me, angry that my own children were starting to feel guilty about the inheritance. That night, I confronted him. I told him that this behavior was hurtful, especially since I'd always treated his kids as if they were my own. I reminded him that I'd gone out of my way to make sure they feel loved and included. But he brushed it off, saying he was only teaching his kids about the real world and that, in his view, this was unfair treatment. The next few days were tense. I could see the change in the atmosphere at home. My kids felt awkward around my husband and his kids, unsure if they could talk about their grandparents without upsetting someone. My husband continued with his passive aggressive comments, and it became clear that he wasn't going to let this go. I realized that this wasn't just a matter of money, it was a matter of trust, respect, and family dynamics. If my husband couldn't respect this boundary, what else would he resent? What other lines would he cross if he didn't get his way? After a particularly tense evening, I made a decision. I reached out to my ex in laws to discuss the situation, explaining the toll it was taking on the kids and on our family as a whole. They were incredibly understanding, and while they were supportive of whatever I chose to do, they also felt strongly that the inheritance was for their grandkids alone. With their blessing, I decided to set up a separate savings plan with some of my own funds for my husband's kids. It wouldn't be on the same level as the trust, but it would be something to help them in the future. I hoped this gesture would show my husband that I cared about his kids too, and that I was doing what I could to support all the kids in our family. When I told him, he looked at me in disbelief. He didn't thank me, he just said, "It's about time." That stung, but I held my ground, knowing that I was doing what I thought was best. Still, I had to wonder if this compromise would really resolve anything or not. Update 1. It's been 4 days since I decided to set up a small savings plan for my husband's kids to try and smooth things over. I thought it would be enough, at least. I hoped it would be a gesture that showed I cared and was willing to meet him halfway. But I'm quickly realizing that nothing I do seems to satisfy him. It's like every attempt I make to bridge this divide only leads him to demand more. I'm exhausted and honestly a little hurt by how he's handling things. The day after I told him about the savings plan, he barely acknowledged it. I thought he'd at least appreciate the gesture, but he acted like it was the bare minimum, like I hadn't just dug into my own savings for his kids' future. When I tried to bring it up, he dismissed it, saying, "Well, it's not exactly a trust fund, is it?" I felt my frustration building, but I kept quiet, hoping he'd let it go and we could move on. But the following day, he made it clear he wasn't going to let it go. During breakfast, he made a remark about how some people prioritize their own blood over others, and I realized he was setting the tone for what was going to be a long day. Later, when my kids were in earshot, he casually brought up the trust fund again, saying how lucky they were to have grandparents who cared enough to make their future secure. I saw my kids' faces fall as they absorbed the implications of his words. My daughter, who's usually bubbly, stayed silent, pushing her food around on her plate. My son looked at me, clearly uncomfortable, and I felt a pang of guilt and anger. Why did he need to make them feel guilty for something they had no control over? It got to the point where I felt like I had no choice but to talk to him again. That evening, I pulled him aside and tried to reason with him. I told him that his comments were hurting the kids, that they were starting to feel like they didn't deserve what their grandparents had given them. I tried to explain that his bitterness was creating a wedge, not just between him and me, but between the kids too. But he just shrugged it off, insisting he was only stating the facts and that they'd have to get used to it. The conversation went nowhere. He refused to see my perspective and kept insisting that his kids were being cheated. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was as if he couldn't recognize that this was a gift, not a right. His inability to accept that fact was eroding any hope I had of finding common ground. I thought we were finally reaching a point of understanding, but it was clear he wasn't willing to compromise emotionally, no matter what I did financially. By the end of the night, I felt drained and defeated. I went to bed with a heavy heart, realizing that this issue was about more than just money. It was about trust and respect, and right now I wasn't feeling much of either from my husband. The next day, I took some time to reflect on everything that had happened over the past few months. I thought about my kids, how they were slowly becoming aware of the tension, but unsure how to process it. I thought about his kids, who were starting to view me as some sort of enemy rather than a caring parental figure. I realized I needed to make a change, not just for my own sake, but for the kids. This toxic atmosphere wasn't healthy, and if my husband wasn't willing to compromise, I had to consider what was best for all of us. I started looking into family counseling options, thinking maybe a neutral party could help us bridge this divide. I approached my husband with the idea, hoping he'd see it as a way to heal and move forward. But he refused, saying he didn't need some stranger telling him how to feel about his kids. That was the final blow. I realized then that he wasn't interested in healing. He was too focused on his resentment to see the damage it was causing. So here I am, 4 days after setting up that savings plan, feeling more isolated than ever. I know I did the right thing by my kids, and I know I've done my best to support his. But his inability to accept this reality is slowly tearing our family apart. I'm left wondering if there's anything I can do to fix this, or if it's time to face the fact that this marriage may not survive his bitterness. It's not a decision I want to make lightly, especially considering all the children involved, but I have to think about the future, theirs and mine. I want to provide them with a home filled with love, not resentment. In the coming days, I'll be weighing my options and figuring out what's best for everyone involved. For now, all I can do is focus on supporting the kids, reassuring them that they are loved and that none of this is their fault. Whether or not my husband can move past his anger is up to him. I'm still hopeful, but for the first time, I'm starting to see that I may have to prepare for a future without him if he can't let go of this toxic grudge. Update 2. It's been about a week since my last update, and honestly, things have only continued to unravel. After that tense conversation with my husband about family counseling, I thought maybe he'd come around and consider it, but instead, he doubled down on his stance, insisting he didn't need help and that I was the one creating problems. I felt like I was talking to a wall. No matter how calmly I approached the subject, it was like he was completely closed off. The atmosphere at home has been thick with tension. My kids have been walking on eggshells, and his kids seem to have picked up on the negative energy. I catch my youngest sometimes watching me with a furrowed brow as if trying to understand why things feel so strained. I hate seeing them like this. They shouldn't have to bear the weight of adult conflicts. One evening, I decided to address the situation head on. I gathered everyone in the living room and attempted to explain that sometimes families go through rough patches and it doesn't mean we don't care about each other. I wanted them to know that I love all of them, but it seemed my husband was fixated on the idea that there was some kind of hierarchy or favoritism at play, and it was affecting the kids deeply. My speech was heartfelt. I hoped it would help clarify things. However, it didn't go as planned. My husband interrupted, insisting that my kids didn't understand how lucky they were. His words hung in the air like a cloud. I could see my kids flinch at the implication. I tried to salvage the moment, explaining that we were a blended family and that we all needed to support each other. But my husband's eyes hardened and he accused me of sugarcoating the situation. It felt like he was determined to make me the villain in this story, and it hurt. Over the next couple of days, I noticed my husband becoming more distant. He was there physically, but emotionally checked out. He wouldn't engage in conversations with me or his kids, and the silence in the house became unbearable. I tried to initiate some family activities to lighten the mood, movie nights, game evenings, but he'd decline or just sit there sullen and unresponsive. I felt like I was fighting a losing battle, and it was disheartening. Then one evening, I was getting the kids ready for bed when my daughter approached me, her voice small and hesitant. Mom, is it okay if we don't talk about the trust fund anymore? My heart sank. I'd been trying to protect them from the stress, but it was clear my husband's attitude was taking its toll on them. I told her that they could talk about whatever they wanted, but I understood if they wanted to avoid it. She nodded, looking relieved, but I couldn't shake the feeling of disappointment that they felt the need to tiptoe around this issue. A few days later, my ex in laws called again to check in. I hesitated to share the growing tension at home, but I needed someone to talk about everything that had been happening. When I finally opened up, my ex mother in law was supportive and understanding. She expressed concern that my husband was making a difficult situation even more complicated, and I could hear the worry in her voice. She suggested that perhaps they could come down for a weekend visit. I thought it was a great idea and agreed, thinking it might help ease some of the tension. They've always had a good relationship with the kids, and maybe seeing their grandparents would bring some positivity into our chaotic situation. When I brought it up to my husband, though, he reacted defensively. He couldn't understand why I would want my ex in laws to come and visit when it would only serve to highlight the disparity between our families. I reminded him that it was about the kids and that they deserved to see their grandparents. It felt like every time I tried to suggest something that might help, he only dug his heels in deeper. That weekend, my ex in laws arrived, and immediately the atmosphere brightened. My kids were thrilled to see their grandparents, and it was heartwarming to watch them play together. My ex in laws treated all the kids equally, lavishing attention on my husband's children as well. It was a stark reminder of how much love and support there was to go around, regardless of bloodlines. While they were visiting, I tried to engage my husband in family activities, but he seemed uninterested. Instead, he stayed on the sidelines, often retreating to our bedroom or stepping outside for fresh air. My ex in laws noticed his behavior and expressed concern. At one point, my ex father in law pulled me aside and asked if everything was okay. I hesitated, but finally opened up about the issues we'd been facing. He listened patiently and offered his perspective, suggesting that my husband might just be struggling with feelings of inadequacy. I appreciated his insights, but it didn't help me resolve the tension at home. As the weekend went on, we all sat down for a family dinner. I hoped it would be a chance to create a positive memory. Dinner started off well, with laughter and chatter filling the air, but as the meal progressed, my husband became more withdrawn, and I could sense the tension creeping back in. When the conversation shifted to future plans, my ex mother in law asked about the kids' aspirations. My husband, who had been silent for much of the evening, suddenly chimed in, stating that my kids didn't have to worry about anything with their trust fund. I felt my heart sink. It was as if he couldn't help himself. I shot him a look, hoping he'd pick up on the discomfort around the table, but he seemed oblivious. The conversation shifted awkwardly, and I could see the kids exchanging glances, unsure of how to respond. My daughter looked down at her plate, and I felt a rush of anger towards my husband. It was like he was determined to make this a battleground instead of a family gathering. After dinner, I confronted him privately. I was upset and tired of him dragging this conflict into every situation, especially when the kids were involved. I told him he was ruining what could have been a great evening, and I reminded him that the kids were watching. He didn't respond well to my frustration, and things escalated quickly. He accused me of prioritizing my ex in laws over our family, claiming I didn't care about his feelings at all. I felt like I was reaching a breaking point. I took a deep breath, trying to collect my thoughts before responding. I told him that it wasn't about choosing sides, but about recognizing the love and support that existed in both families. But he was too far gone in his bitterness to hear me. Instead, he stormed off to our bedroom, leaving me feeling defeated. The next morning, my ex in laws left and the house felt emptier. My kids were sad to see them go, and I could sense the heaviness in the air. I decided to talk to them about what had happened over the weekend, reassuring them that they were loved no matter what. They both seemed relieved, and it felt good to remind them that they had a supportive family surrounding them. In the days that followed, I noticed my husband was still in a funk. He would sit silently at the dinner table, staring at his food without engaging in conversation. It was disheartening to see him so withdrawn. Finally, I decided I had to take matters into my own hands. I called a family counselor, hoping to schedule an appointment just for the two of us. I wanted to address the issues we were facing head on, but I also wanted to show him that I was committed to working through this together. When I mentioned it to him, he rolled his eyes and said he didn't need therapy. That was when I realized I might have to take a more direct approach. I sat him down that evening and told him how much this situation was impacting me, our kids, and our family. I explained that while I understood his feelings of resentment, I needed him to recognize that this was bigger than just us. It was about creating a loving environment for our children, and his refusal to engage in the conversation was detrimental. I urged him to consider how his actions and words were shaping the kids' perspectives of family. It was a tough conversation, but I also felt a glimmer of hope. I could see him considering my words, and I could only hope that it would spark something in him. In the end, he promised to think about it, and for the first time in a while, I felt a tiny flicker of optimism. But as the days passed, the shadows of our conflict loomed large. I continued to put effort into maintaining a positive environment for the kids, but the emotional strain of trying to hold everything together was beginning to wear me down. I knew I needed to keep pushing for change, both for my sake and for the sake of our blended family. Well, it's been a little over a week since my last update, and I honestly didn't know what to expect at this point. Things have been tense, but I'm cautiously optimistic that we're moving in a better direction. After that tough conversation with my husband about how our family dynamic was affecting the kids, I was left feeling both hopeful and anxious. Surprisingly, my husband seemed to take my words to heart, at least a little bit. The next day, he woke up and made an effort to engage with the kids more. I caught him laughing with his youngest during breakfast, and it was heartwarming to see that glimmer of the dad I fell in love with. It felt like we had a small breakthrough, and I hoped it would continue, but there was still part of me that was bracing for the next wave of tension. One night after the kids had gone to bed, I sat down with him on the couch. I took a deep breath, deciding it was time to talk again. I expressed how much it meant to me that he was trying, and I appreciated the effort he was making. He looked at me, and for a moment I could see the tension in his eyes start to soften. He admitted he was struggling with feelings of inadequacy and jealousy when it came to my kids' trust fund. I listened and reminded him that it wasn't about favoritism, it was about ensuring all the kids had opportunities in life. Over the next few days, we both made an effort to open up more. He started talking about his feelings, and I found that having those conversations made a difference. We even discussed family counseling again. And while he wasn't entirely sold on the idea, he agreed to think about it. It felt like we were finally starting to break down some of the barriers we'd put up between us. Then something unexpected happened. My ex in laws reached out again, asking if they could come for another visit. I was a bit hesitant at first, given the recent tensions, but I thought it might be a good opportunity to show my husband how loving and inclusive a family can be. I cleared it with him first, and to my surprise, he agreed. When my ex in laws arrived, it felt different this time. I could see my husband making an effort to engage, even joking around with them as they played board games with all the kids. There was a warmth in the room that hadn't been there before, and I couldn't help but smile as I watched everyone laughing together. It was a reminder of how families can come together despite differences and past relationships. As the weekend progressed, we all sat down for dinner one evening, and my ex father in law decided to bring up the trust fund in a casual way. He shared stories about how they had created it with the intention of supporting my kids' futures, and he emphasized that it wasn't meant to exclude anyone. Instead, it was about providing opportunities for them to thrive. My husband listened, and for the first time, I saw him nodding along instead of bristling. After dinner, my kids wanted to go outside and play, so I suggested that we all join them. As we were out there, I noticed my husband talking to my oldest son, asking him about his interests and what he wanted to do in future. It felt like such a breakthrough moment. He was finally engaging with the kids and they were responding positively. They were laughing and chatting, and for a brief moment, the tension melted away. The following week, things continued to improve. My husband started taking more initiative at home, even planning a family outing for us all. We visited a local amusement park, and seeing the kids' faces light up on the rides was incredible. There were no fights, no tension, just pure joy. I could feel the love in the air, and it was as if we were finally beginning to blend our families in a more meaningful way. However, even amidst the positive changes, there were moments where my husband would still occasionally voice his concerns about the trust fund. I stayed patient, reminding him that it was important to focus on what we were building together as a family. I emphasized that the love we showed each other mattered far more than any financial situation. As time went on, I began to notice my husband was shifting his perspective. He started to engage more with my kids, even asking them about their school projects and interests. It felt like a significant change and made me realize that he was beginning to see them as part of our family rather than as a separate entity. One evening, as we were winding down after dinner, my husband surprised me by suggesting that we could set up a family trust that included all the kids. He explained that he wanted to ensure everyone had a stake in their future, regardless of where the money came from. It felt like a light bulb moment. We talked through the details, and it was nice to see him taking ownership of the situation rather than feeling threatened by it. I still wasn't completely free from worry, but I felt like we were moving forward together. That sense of unity was something I'd been longing for, and it made the challenges we faced feel manageable. I started to see a future where our blended family could be truly cohesive, supporting one another through thick and thin. As for the kids, they seemed to be thriving amidst all these changes. They were happier, playing together without hesitation, and it was heartwarming to see them creating memories together. There was less anxiety in the house, and I could tell they were relieved to have a more peaceful atmosphere. A couple of weeks later, and I can honestly say we're in a much better place than I ever anticipated. My husband and I have found a rhythm. We're working together as a team. We even decided to have regular family meetings to ensure everyone feels included and heard. It's been a positive change that I believe will keep our family moving forward no matter what challenges may arise. Overall, I've learned that navigating a blended family can be complex, but is also incredibly rewarding. The trust fund situation may have started as a source of tension, but it ultimately pushed us to communicate better and understand each other more deeply. I'm grateful for how far we've come, and I feel hopeful for our future as a united family. P.S. Husband tried to create family drama over trust funds. Ended up learning a hard lesson about love, respect, and what truly matters in a blended family. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.